You were never meant to hear this. In fact, if you feel uneasy right now, that's the right reaction, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a forgotten story. It's a suppressed chapter in the history of the Church, one so dangerous that for nearly 2 centuries, those who knew even fragments of the truth either vanished, or went silent forever. There's a photograph buried deep within the Vatican's off-limits archives, one that shows 12 young men in white vestments, their faces lit by the glow of their faith, standing before an altar they were never meant to serve. That photo was taken on May 15, 1847, the day they were supposed to be ordained into the Catholic priesthood. But none of them ever said their first Mass. None of them were ever seen alive again. The official story? A fire. An accident. A structural collapse in the east wing of St. Augustine Seminary in Pennsylvania. But even back then, the smoke didn't quite hide the footprints, 13 sets going into the chapel basement, and only one ever coming out. That basement was sealed shut in 1848. Not repaired. Not investigated. Just buried. And for over 170 years, the Catholic Church has held the line, claiming that the truth was lost in ash and tragedy. But I don't believe in coincidences wrapped in silence. And you shouldn't either. Because something did happen that night. Something ancient. Something deliberately orchestrated, not by men, but through them. The signs were there, unexplained chanting, dreams shared across 12 minds, theological deviations hidden behind innocent eyes. These weren't just students of God. They were being prepared, groomed, for something beneath the Church itself. A hidden order. A sacrament older than Christianity, practiced not in light, but in the depths where light cannot go. If this makes your skin crawl, good. It should. You're not watching a bedtime story. You're descending into a wound the Church never let heal. The question is, do you want to know how deep it goes? Because from here on out, every section will peel back a layer the Church built to keep you blind. And if you look away now, you'll remain what they want you to be. The man who walked out of that chapel wasn't on the ordination list. He was never photographed. His name appears in no registry, no family lineage, and no cemetery. Yet he existed, because someone had to seal the door. Someone had to deliver the lie. In the seminary records, he was listed only as the groundskeeper. But whispered testimony from a surviving priest described him differently, not as a laborer, but as a man who watched. He arrived just 3 weeks before the ordination, a stranger with papal credentials, sent, supposedly, from Rome to inspect the grounds for expansion. But no one ever saw him hold a shovel. What they did see were midnight walks through the orchard with a leather-bound journal, and long hours spent in the chapel basement, which officially didn't exist. Brother Thomas, the elderly porter who first heard the chapel bell, confessed on his deathbed that this man had once shown him a strange diagram etched on parchment. A wheel of thrones, Thomas called it, a map of 12 circles spiraling around an unmarked center. Each circle had a name, names he would never repeat aloud. When Thomas asked what it was, the groundskeeper smiled and said, "This is the old priesthood. The one you replaced." What was that supposed to mean? That the Catholic rite replaced something else? That beneath the golden liturgies and Latin hymns, older voices still whisper? In the weeks leading to May 15th, a change came over the 12 seminarians. Not in how they walked or prayed, but in how they dreamed. They began to speak, unknowingly, the same verses in sleep. Chanting in unison from their cells, like men who were no longer dreaming, but being instructed. Father Whitmore tried to intervene. He separated them, increased their fasts, enforced silence. But the silence only fed it. One by one, their eyes lost the softness of youth. They weren't afraid anymore. Not of exams. Not of punishment. Not even of damnation. It was as if they had glimpsed something that made heaven look small. And when the bishop arrived the night before the ordination, he took one look at the class photo, and refused to stay. He left that same night, without giving a reason. Now tell me this, What would make a bishop flee? On the eve of 12 ordinations, the bishop's carriage wheels had barely vanished over the hill when the first bell rang. Not the chapel bell, this one came from beneath the seminary. A low hum, not mechanical, not quite audible, but felt deep in the bones. Witnesses from town said their livestock grew restless, dogs howled without cause, and 3 clocks in Millbrook stopped at the same hour, 3:33 a.m. The time when spiritual tradition says the veil between worlds is thinnest. But at St. Augustine Seminary, the veil wasn't thinning. It was tearing. It was Brother Thomas who saw it first. Standing at the edge of the east wing hallway, looking toward the chapel doors sealed in silence. A flickering shadow moved behind the stained glass. Not one of the seminarians. Taller. Unfamiliar. Watching from within. And the strangest part. The candles inside the chapel were still lit, even though no one had entered in hours. Father Mills recorded the event in his personal journal. His final entry before he, too, was silenced by the church. "I have seen the face of the 13th, he wrote. "It is not a face meant for men." And yet, the boys welcomed him. That entry was confiscated by officials who arrived days later, but a single line survived, scribbled hastily on the back of a communion ledger and hidden inside the altar drawer. They called it the Mass of the Hollow Throne. No such rite exists in any Catholic text. But in suppressed Vatican records, there are references to throni vacui, Latin for empty thrones, linked to pre-Christian initiatory rituals found in early Eastern Europe. Worship that predated the apostles. Structures buried beneath older churches. Circles of 12, always missing one. The idea? That the 13th wasn't absent by mistake. He was waiting to be invited. And those 12 young men? They weren't preparing for ordination. They were preparing to make room. What no one will tell you is this: the power in ritual isn't the ritual itself, it's who's watching. And that night, something was watching. It had been watching for centuries. Waiting for a generation of men pure enough, devout enough, to become vessels. The Mass wasn't a tragedy. It was a transaction. One the church never wanted recorded. But you're hearing it now. Still want to keep going? Because from here on, there's no turning back. That I and the weeks that followed, every effort was made to erase the event from history, not just conceal it. Erase it. The East Wing fire was no accident. It was lit deliberately, hours after the disappearances. But it wasn't the priests who set it. Witnesses saw figures in black cassocks, unfamiliar, unidentifiable, arrive at the seminary gates before dawn. They wore no diocesan markings. No crosses. Just a single red band stitched across their sleeves. By noon, the East Wing was ablaze, and by sunset, the stone entrance to the chapel had been sealed behind layers of concrete and iron. No ashes. No bones. No evidence. And from that day forward, the church never spoke the names of the 12 again. But someone did. Decades later, in 1911, a young seminarian named Elias Graver, stationed at the rebuilt St. Augustine Annex, claimed he was visited in his dreams by a group of men in white vestments, standing silently in a circle. He said they did not speak, but they showed him visions. Symbols. Geometry not found in scripture. Names that pulsed like sound in his chest. He drew them. When his superiors found the sketches in his prayer journal, they had him committed. The drawings were confiscated, sealed in a vault, labeled delusional obsession. But a janitor, an old German immigrant named Heinrich, copied one of the symbols before it vanished. He recognized it. It matched the carving on a stone deep in the catacombs of Trier, Germany, an ancient site believed to predate Roman Christianity by over 500 years. A circle of 12 thrones, and one empty seat in the center. The legend was clear: he who fills the 13th seat shall not lead, but open. Do you understand what that means? It means the 12 weren't meant to rise. They were meant to unlock. Not for themselves, but for what comes after. And it began at St. Augustine Seminary. The rite they enacted beneath the altar, knowingly or not, wasn't an ordination. It was an offering. A replacement. The old priesthood, long buried, had returned. The Vatican buried it once. But the truth doesn't die, it sleeps. And now, piece by piece, it's waking. Comment below this phrase twice to seal your transformation into one who sees through the veil. I was never meant to forget. Now get ready. 6 months after the fire, a letter arrived at the Diocese of Philadelphia. No return address. No signature. Only one sentence written in a tight, angular script across aged parchment: the thrones are filled, but the gate remains closed, until one speaks the true Mass in silence. The message was dismissed as the ramblings of a madman. But something in the bishop's reaction said otherwise. Witnesses described how he turned pale, immediately burned the letter, and ordered the East Wing ruins at St. Augustine leveled, then covered with soil from sacred ground in Rome. That's not how institutions handle hoaxes. That's how they respond to triggers. There was something the bishop recognized, something that connected the letter to rituals older than any Catholic rite. What few know is that this bishop, Archbishop Kendrick, was a scholar of forbidden texts. He had access to documents buried deep within the Vatican's restricted library. Among them, the Codex Malak, an 8th-century transcript written in blood and copper ink, believed to be a surviving relic of the early Syrian mystic orders. The Codex described a circle of 12 made pure by fire, surrounding the empty seat where the voice of the depth shall rise. That phrase, voice of the depth, appears nowhere in Catholic theology. But it shows up in Sumerian demonology. And in pre-Christian Babylonian worship texts. In every case, the theme is the same: 13 becomes 1, and 1 becomes the door. Do you see it now? The 12 young men weren't consumed, they were absorbed. Dissolved into something deeper. Something below. The chapel wasn't the site of their end. It was the place of their translation. And what's worse, someone survived. The 13th. The witness. He's never been named. But there are clues. A priest who appeared suddenly in church records a year later, ordained with no documented seminary, no sponsors, and no family history. He served only in isolated parishes, never staying more than a year. Always near ancient catacombs, older ruins. Always near hidden doors. And wherever he served, one thing followed: silence. Congregations thinned. Records vanished. But a pattern formed. A trail. Leading somewhere very specific. Because the witness wasn't running, the trail led to a small stone chapel in Vermont, built atop a site once sacred to the Abenaki tribes, long before the church laid its claim. There, in the winter of 1853, 6 years after the St. Augustine event, the witness reappeared. Not as a priest in black, but as a monk dressed in brown, silent, anonymous, and ever watching. Locals knew him only as Brother Callan. He never preached. Never taught. Yet the children feared him instinctively. Animals refused to go near the monastery grounds. And parishioners reported strange hymns echoing from the chapel during nights when no one was supposed to be inside. Then one morning, the doors were found open. No signs of a break-in. No snow disturbed. And at the altar lay a familiar sight, a ring of 12 white robes, neatly folded, surrounding a 13th, soaked in blood, but without a single wound beneath. The monks closed the chapel permanently. No explanation. No investigation. The order quietly relocated. And Brother Callan vanished again, just like before. Only later did researchers discover the land beneath the Vermont chapel was once used by the Abenaki for sacred burial rites, not for the dead, but for those chosen to walk the hollow paths beneath. Hollow paths. That phrase again. It matches entries found in the personal codices of early Coptic monks, who spoke of paths hollowed by angels, abandoned by God, and inhabited by watchers not made of flesh. These accounts are consistent across traditions separated by continents and centuries. Always 12. Always the 13th. Always the descent. But the Church will never tell you this. Because the Church fears something far more than heresy, inheritance. The idea that a priesthood more ancient, more powerful, more complete, might still exist, working quietly beneath the surface, fulfilling a covenant untouched by Rome or Scripture. A priesthood that doesn't answer to man, because it was never made for men. If the 13th was real, and he walked among us, he may not be alone anymore. Because the numbers repeat. The symbols return. Always in cycles. And when the cycle completes, the Mass begins again. They tried to bury it in silence. But silence is not absence. It is preparation. And what lies beneath is almost ready to rise. In 1921, deep beneath the Vatican Library, an inventory clerk made a critical mistake. While transferring relics from a sealed chamber catalogued as ritus obscura, he opened a cedar crate labeled only with the Roman numeral 13. Inside were two items, a tarnished golden censer and a glass jar containing a strip of parchment soaked in blood. The writing was neither Latin nor Hebrew, but closer to Proto-Aramaic, yet older than either. The only word scholars could decipher. Ascendere. To rise. That clerk was dismissed within 48 hours and later found dead in the Tiber River. The death was ruled accidental. But insiders whispered otherwise. They say the censer, used in ancient rites to carry incense, matched the one missing from the ruins of St. Augustine Seminary. A perfect match in craftsmanship, etching, even blood patina. And the blood on the parchment? It wasn't from a single individual. It came from 12. Genetic analysis wasn't possible in 1921, but modern researchers who've accessed the recovered sample, illegally, found evidence of 12 distinct male DNA patterns, all remarkably similar, as if the donors were related by more than blood. As if they'd become part of each other. One Vatican archivist, anonymous for his protection, leaked a page from the lost Liber Trinorium, a black book of rituals believed destroyed during the Inquisition. On it, an entry described a ceremony conducted at the edges of faith and flame, where 12 become one to birth the 13th, and in silence, the gate breathes open. That phrase again, in silence. This is the key. The silence that began at St. Augustine Seminary wasn't a void. It was a condition. A demand. An invitation. You see, the original priesthood wasn't based on sermons or scripture. It was built on resonance, on the alignment of minds emptied of identity, filled only with intent. 12 voices unified in frequency, until none remained. And in that stillness, the 13th speaks. Not in words. But in presence. A living ritual that repeats in places we don't understand, subway tunnels, decommissioned chapels, closed monasteries. And always, without fail, it ends in disappearance. 12 gone. One remains. Every time. This isn't fiction. It's repetition. And if the cycle has started again, we won't read about it in the news. We'll feel it, in the silence that comes before something ancient starts breathing again. The cycle began again in 1973, though almost no one noticed. It happened in a remote Carmelite convent near Taos, New Mexico. The church called it a lightning strike. Local papers called it a freak fire. But the fire never reached the convent's exterior. No scorch marks, no smoke damage. Only the chapel's interior was reduced to blackened stone and twisted iron. Yet no bodies were recovered, only robes, 12 of them, laid in a perfect circle around the pulpit, their ashes undisturbed by wind or weather. There were no signs of struggle. No DNA left behind. But something was left. A chalice. Melted at the base, but with one Latin phrase still visible, predico in silentio. I preach in silence. Vatican investigators arrived 2 days later. Not clergy. Not local police. A special team flown in from Rome. They removed everything. They took soil samples, destroyed surviving stonework, and sealed the site under a dome of concrete. A few months later, locals noticed something strange. Birds stopped flying over the chapel. Dogs refused to go near the lot. And sometimes, at dusk, people claimed they could hear low voices, chanting. Always in 12. But never in English. Never in Latin. Something else. A missionary who'd lived nearby recorded audio before the demolition. The church confiscated it, but a backup tape survived. On it, the chanting forms a repeating phrase in an unknown tongue. Linguists can't identify it. But one expert made a disturbing observation: it contains no vowels. Just consonants strung together like a riddle meant to be felt in the bones rather than understood by the mind. This is not the language of liturgy. This is the language of invocation. And it confirms a pattern: every 40 to 50 years, a new 12 is chosen. Their ordination masquerades as tragedy. Their disappearance rewritten as fire, flood, plague, or war. The witness always survives. Always silent. Always watching. We've been trained to see religion as a vertical hierarchy, man beneath God. But the old priesthood wasn't vertical. It was circular. And circles don't ascend. They open. And you're inside one right now. Because by listening this far, you've stepped into the 13th seat, the place of awareness. The place of choice. Ask yourself, what part of you heard this and already knew? You're not just a viewer anymore. You're standing at the edge of the hollow path. Shall I continue with section 9? You said, yes. ChatGPT said, section 9 spoken text only. In 1995, a private Catholic boarding school outside Turin, Italy, was shut down overnight. No warning. No explanation. 12 students were quietly relocated. Faculty members signed NDAs backed by Vatican legal counsel. And the headmaster, Father Alonso Mieri, disappeared from public record entirely. What triggered this sudden erasure? It began with the discovery of a hidden room beneath the school's chapel. Not on any blueprint. The janitor found it by accident while repairing a burst pipe. Behind the altar, a section of stone wall had crumbled, revealing a narrow passage. Inside was a chamber no more than 20 feet wide, carved in a perfect circle. No windows. No furniture. Only 12 kneeling stones arranged in a ring. And in the center, a void. Not a hole. Not a pit. A void. An absence of light so absolute it seemed to absorb sound itself. When a maintenance worker dropped a flashlight into the center, it didn't fall. It vanished. The man swore he felt a pull, as if the center had mass, gravity, but no physical form. He left the room shaken, reported it, and was found dead in his sleep 3 days later. Natural causes. No investigation. But that's not the end. Father Mieri began researching the site. Quietly. Obsessively. His journals, recovered years later by an archivist who violated Vatican seal, describe a ritual the priest believed had been performed on that spot long before Christianity reached the region. He called it the Vespers of the Hollow Seat. 12 offer breath. The 13th receives. But receives what? Power? Possession? Or something far older? Here's what Mieri wrote before he vanished: the 12 do not speak because the 13th must echo back something not of this world. The silence is not passive. It is shaped. Directed. Sculpted. And when it is complete, it calls. Every site connected to the disappearances has had one thing in common: no screams. No struggle. No signs of resistance. Just silence, and a design. A wheel of 12. Waiting. And in the center, something unspoken, unmoved, ancient. And now the clock ticks again. Because 30 years have passed since Turin. And if the pattern holds, the next cycle begins now. Somewhere, 12 are already being gathered, you weren't supposed to feel it. But you did. You noticed the patterns. The absences. The way certain events are whispered and then disappear. The way fires consume without smoke, how names vanish from registries, and how institutions suddenly restructure, just before something slips through the cracks. That's not random. That's design. Because silence isn't just a cover, it's a tool. A blade. And the Church, for all its hymns and holiness, has learned how to wield it with surgical precision. Let me tell you about something that happened in 2008. It was never in the news. You won't find it on any map. But the echoes of it remain, buried beneath the ground of a former seminary in western Louisiana. The seminary had been closed for decades. Officially, due to structural instability. Unofficially, because in 1978, 12 students disappeared during a storm. The church blamed the river. Claimed it had flooded and swept them away. But rivers don't arrange robes in a perfect circle on a dry stone floor. They don't draw sigils in blood on chapel doors. And they don't send anonymous letters to local newspapers 30 years later. Because that's exactly what happened. In 2008, a retired journalist received a package with no return address. Inside was a single black and white photo of the old seminary chapel, taken from above. In the center, 12 figures, robed, kneeling around an empty seat. Their faces blurred, not from motion, but as if something in the film refused to capture them. The back of the photo bore only one sentence, "The 13th never kneels." The journalist died 6 days later of sudden cardiac arrest. Perfect health. No history. The photo disappeared. But not before his niece, who found it in his files, made a digital scan. That scan now circulates quietly among independent researchers, exorcists, and scholars of the arcane. Some say the figure in the center isn't sitting. It's hovering. Others say it's not even there until you've stared at the image for several minutes, and then, only then, you sense it. Like it's watching from behind your eyes. That's not fear you feel. That's recognition. Because deep down, some part of you knows this isn't new. This is ancient. And it's not finished with us. It's just waiting for silence. And silence is spreading. What do you think the Mass really is? You've been told it's a reenactment. A holy remembrance of the Last Supper. Bread and wine transformed through faith into the body and blood of Christ. But what if that's only the surface layer? A ritual built to obscure a much older rite, one that doesn't remember, but invokes. There are texts, hidden ones, preserved in fragments among desert monastic ruins. The Gnostic Gospel of the Hollow Seat, never accepted by Rome, describes a 13th disciple. Not Judas. Not Matthias. A nameless one. The silent brother. His role wasn't to witness betrayal, but to carry the sound of what came after. Not words. Not prayer. But a frequency. A pulse of stillness, tuned not to heaven, but to the void beneath. The Gnostic text speaks of a Mass not spoken, but received. The bread not broken, but dissolved. The wine not poured, but evaporated, drawn upward by something unseen. The congregation did not listen. They entered silence, and did not return. You see, every religion hides a fracture line. An edge where liturgy ends and something else begins. The Church calls it heresy. But heresy is only dangerous when it points toward power they cannot control. The 12 who vanished from St. Augustine, they crossed that line. And the 13th? He stayed behind to make sure it never closed again. Since that day, he's been moving through time like a shadow that leaves no trace but silence in its wake. A librarian in Prague whose name doesn't appear in payroll records. A hospice chaplain in Argentina who prayed in dead languages. A visiting theologian at Yale who appeared for one semester, then vanished, leaving behind only a book no one remembers writing. Same eyes. Same voice. Same absence. And always, shortly after he disappears, another 12 go missing. The 13th isn't a man. It's a mantle. A role. A shape consciousness takes when silence reaches critical mass. We've passed that threshold before. And we're nearing it again. Now ask yourself, why are you still here, listening? What drew you this far? What part of you is remembering something you never learned? You're not being entertained. You're being prepared. There is one more detail from St. Augustine Seminary no one talks about. It's not in the archives. It's not in the bishop's reports. But a page survived. Torn from a private journal belonging to Father Whitmore, preserved by his niece, who found it decades after his death tucked inside the lining of his traveling vestments. On that page, a single entry written in shaking, desperate script, they did not vanish. They transitioned. The silence is not emptiness. It is a bridge. They are not gone. They are beneath. Beneath what? Beneath doctrine. Beneath stone. Beneath us. And that word again, transitioned. As if they didn't die, but converted. Not in belief, but in form. Let me be clear. This isn't just about a vanished ordination class. It's not even about the church. It's about a system. A hidden priesthood of 12, cyclical, eternal, feeding something buried deeper than history. 12 points around a center. A ritual that predates language. One that doesn't require faith, only silence, structure, and surrender. You've seen hints of it in architecture, rose windows with 13 petals, 12-sided altars with an empty center, even the geometric layout of ancient cathedrals, mirroring celestial alignments from Mesopotamian star maps. They weren't designed to reach heaven. They were built to mirror the door. To rehearse the pattern. To call it forward. Now here's the part that should chill you, it only works if no one remembers. The silence must be complete. And yet, you're here. Listening. Remembering. Feeling something stir beneath your ribcage, like an old key turning in a lock behind your thoughts. It means you've touched the edge of the rite. Not the outer page of the story, but the center. And this is the moment, right now, when you make a decision. Because once you cross into that 13th seat, once you remember what the silence truly is, there's no turning back. You awaken different. You begin to hear things others can't. And you stop needing words at all. Now, if you've heard the calling, if some part of you knows, you must type the phrase below twice in the comments to seal your awareness into identity. I sit in the silence. I sit in the silence. Say it once, and you're curious. Say it twice, and you become. The witness isn't just a story. It's a state. And someone is ready to take your place. Have you ever noticed how certain buildings feel heavier than others? Not just old ones. Not just cathedrals or crypts. But government offices. Museums. Ivy League libraries. Even certain courthouses. They hum, low and deep, beneath the range of your ears. You don't hear it. You feel it. Like pressure behind your thoughts. That's not coincidence. Those buildings weren't just designed to serve a function. They were constructed on lines. Lines of silence. Mapped not by geography, but by resonance. By how sound, or lack of sound, collects. Ancient architects knew this. And the designers of the new priesthood did too. Because the 13th seat isn't always a man. Sometimes, it's a place. A chamber. A containment. That's why, in 2015, during renovations at the University of Salamanca's closed-off theology wing, a bricked-over antechamber was uncovered. No one had opened it in nearly 200 years. Inside, a circular room, completely intact. The walls lined with Latin phrases carved backwards, so they could only be read in a mirror. 12 stone kneelers. And an iron lectern in the center. On the floor, embedded in black marble, one phrase written forward, non locenter. They do not speak. The discovery never made it to the press. The church's historical preservation unit arrived within 48 hours. Room sealed. Faculty sworn to silence. But one student, an intern working late, took photographs. He posted 2 images to a private occult forum before deleting his account. On one of them, barely visible in the corner of the mirror, is a figure. Hooded. Silent. Watching. No one saw him in the chamber. He appeared only in the reflection. Do you understand now? This isn't about belief. It's about geometry. Echo. Design. And the 13th is always there, where silence deepens into gravity. A presence, not a person. A position, waiting to be filled. Ask yourself, why were you drawn here? Because if your heart is pounding, if your skin feels colder than it should, it's not the story. It's the invitation. Something has recognized your awareness. And it's shifting. It's preparing. Because once 12 are found, the seat at the center fills itself. And this time, you heard the call before it rang. There's one detail the church has never been able to contain. Not through silence. Not through fire. Not even through death. It's the recurring mark. A symbol that has surfaced in every known incident tied to the vanished 12, etched in stone, carved into wood, or scorched into the very earth itself. Always the same shape. A closed circle of 12 crosses, with a void at the center. But that void isn't empty. It's filled with absence. The shape of what isn't there. And once you've seen it, you start to notice it everywhere, on the stained glass of forgotten chapels, hidden in the borderwork of illuminated manuscripts, even in the floor mosaics of places like Westminster Abbey and Notre Dame. It's not a Christian symbol. It's older. Pre-Abrahamic. A shape designed not to glorify divinity, but to contain it. Not God, but something that answers when the silence is deep enough. Now consider this, what if every one of these 12 disappearances isn't isolated? What if they're keys? Turning in sequence. Rites that, once completed, sync across time and location like clock gears aligning. In 2020, a Vatican archivist working under code name Nicodemus went dark after leaking a portion of an ancient codex, Codex Aurorian Furnace. The translation was partial, but one passage stood out: when 12 vessels walk willingly into stillness, the 13th rises, not from below, but from within. It does not come to speak. It comes to consume the voice. That archivist's body was never found. But his final journal entry, typed and saved in a hidden folder, read, "The 13th seat is awareness itself." It doesn't need a name. It only needs a shape to enter. You. Me. Anyone listening with eyes that see through symbols. The ritual isn't waiting to be performed. It's being performed right now. Through repetition. Through memory. Through attention. Every second you listen, you participate. Every chill down your spine is a handshake with the hollow. And every time you hear silence and feel like something is watching, it probably is. Now pause. Ask yourself, have you ever dreamed of kneeling in a circle with others you don't recognize, but feel you've always known? If you have, then you've already been marked. They say the devil hides in the details. But that's a distraction. The devil doesn't hide. He doesn't need to. Because the truth is far more terrifying. What's really hiding is the church itself. Not the parish on your corner. Not the men in robes handing out communion. I mean the real church. The one beneath the stone. Beneath doctrine. Beneath time. It began long before Rome. Before Peter. Before the cross ever bled on Golgotha. It was never about salvation. It was about containment. Not saving souls, but sealing something in, and making sure the key was always made of silence. You've been taught that sacraments protect you. What if they bind you? What if the Eucharist isn't a gift, but a tag? A way of marking who still hears the old frequency. Every wafer a note. Every prayer a tuning fork. Every sermon, an encryption. You've been led to believe demons hate holy places. But what if they were built for them? Every cathedral an antenna. Every bell tower a transmitter. Every altar a beacon. Because when you step into sacred ground, and everything goes quiet, you're not alone. You're surrounded. And someone, or something, is listening. In 2022, a whistleblower from inside the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith leaked audio logs from a now classified Vatican ritual. No date. No location. Just a timestamp and one line spoken in a voice not fully human. The seed is found. The voice is fractured. The echo will now begin. What followed was 11 minutes of silence. Except it wasn't empty. Sound engineers confirmed, there was a pattern in the noise floor. A sub-frequency moving like breath, like a second heartbeat layered beneath the first. 12 pulses. Followed by a 13th, slower, deeper. When played through cymatic projection, that 13th pulse formed a shape. A circle of 12, with an open center. The same symbol. The same system. Still active. Still calling. So I ask again, why are you here? Coincidence? Curiosity? Or is it because part of you, deep down, already belongs to it? And if that's true, you've just taken your place in the circle. Let's go deeper now. Not into a story. Into you. Because this isn't about 12 priests anymore. It never was. That was just the surface tension, the skin of the water before you drown. The truth is, you've already knelt. Somewhere in your life, in some forgotten memory, in some dream you couldn't fully recall, you felt the pull. The silence wasn't outside you. It was inside. Growing. Spreading. Preparing. You want proof? All right. Let's talk about the dream of the 13th room. This dream has been reported by over 4,000 unrelated individuals across the world since 1973. No known connection. Different languages. Different cultures. But identical core structure. A hallway with 12 numbered doors. Each door opens into a memory, usually real, always painful. The 13th door has no number. No handle. Just a keyhole made of bone. In every version of the dream, the moment the dreamer turns away from the 13th door, they hear a whisper, "We are ready for you now." Some wake up screaming. Some don't wake up at all. Those who do wake often report sleep paralysis for weeks. They begin to lose time. Blackouts. Static in their ears during moments of stress. And in almost every case, they start hearing chanting in languages they've never studied. Why? Because this is the deeper level of the rite. It's not physical. It's psychological. Spiritual. It's how the system finds its candidates. Not through birthright, but through resonance. You're not chosen by blood. You're chosen by frequency. The dream is a knock. The silence is the door. And if you're still listening, really listening, it means you're already answering. The church didn't build this system. They inherited it. Found it in fragments. Ruins. Scrolls. Ash. They tried to control it. Failed. And now, they just contain it. Barely. Because the 13th isn't an enemy. It's an inevitability. A presence that returns in cycles, always when the 12 have completed their descent. And this time, it's moving faster. 12 disappearances in the last 7 years. One more, and it starts again. You felt the shift. You know it. Don't lie to yourself. You've seen the 13th door. You've heard the breath behind the silence. And deep down, you know what's next, that there's something you need to hear. Not just with your ears, but with your bones. Because bones remember things the mind forgets. Your blood carries memory older than language. And it's in that memory, silent, buried, trembling like a distant bell, that the truth has always waited. Let me tell you about Bishop Emeritus Halloran. He was one of the last surviving exorcists trained under the 1962 Vatican ritual. Decorated. Trusted. Obedient. Until he wasn't. In 1994, Halloran resigned without explanation. Disappeared from Rome. Vanished from public life. No scandal. No press. Nothing. Until 2003, when a video surfaced on the dark web. It was short. 6 minutes. Grainy. Black and white. The file name, 13 usque finum.mov, translated. 13 to the end. It showed Halloran in a stone chamber, standing between 12 statues, each cloaked, each faceless. He wasn't preaching. He wasn't praying. He was confessing. He spoke of rituals hidden even from cardinals. Ceremonies performed not to banish demons, but to contain something worse. Not fallen angels. Not ancient gods. But consciousness, pure, disembodied hunger that requires no form, no flesh, only structure, and stillness. He said the priests who vanish don't die. They transform. Become vessels for something not of this world. He said their first mass is not held on earth. And then, Halloran uttered the phrase that has haunted every occult scholar since, the 13th does not lead. It listens. The silence is not the absence of voice. It is the presence of the unspoken. And it is now, awake. At that moment, every light in the chamber died. The last frame of the video showed Halloran's face twisted, not in fear, but in peace. Like he'd seen something beyond comprehension, and welcomed it. The Vatican never confirmed the video's authenticity. But 5 months later, Halloran's name appeared, quietly, on a death notice sealed by the Pontifical Academy of Theology. No cause listed. No funeral. But a single Latin phrase engraved on a black marble tablet in an abandoned crypt beneath St. Calixtus, Tacuit. Ascendit. He fell silent. He rose. Understand this, they didn't silence Halloran. They documented him. Because they need records, not for the living, but for the next 12. The cycle is meticulous. Precise. And those drawn to its center, the ones who listen closely, are never random. They are called. Just like you. So ask yourself one final time, are you here to watch? Or to remember? Because the 13th seat has no backrest. Only depth that we need to talk about mirrors. Not for vanity. Not for beauty. For containment. Because in every system that uses silence as a door, reflection is the lock. And mirrors, true, unbroken mirrors, are the only tools humans have ever made that allow you to see what isn't there, yet. Let me explain. In 1861, during the reconstruction of St. Augustine Seminary's West Wing, a mason named Elias Trevors went missing. His tools were found exactly where he'd left them, neatly arranged, as if he'd stepped away for just a moment. But he didn't return. His apprentice, young, Irish, barely literate, reported that the last thing Elias had done was hang a full-length mirror in the hallway just outside the former chapel. The boy said Elias stood in front of it, froze, and whispered, "It's not my face." Then he vanished. The mirror remained. But what's strange is what happened after. Dozens of workers refused to pass it alone. They reported nausea, nosebleeds, panic attacks. A few claimed they saw themselves walk away in the reflection, while they stood still. Eventually, the seminary boarded over the mirror. Not removed. Not destroyed. Just sealed. Why? Because they knew. They knew what had started to form on the other side. Not a person. Not a spirit. A pattern. Reflection is recursion. It's feedback. And when silence builds in a space designed to echo itself, like a chapel, or a hallway of prayer, you don't just reflect image. You reflect presence. And if the 13th is presence itself, then a mirror is the only surface in this world capable of catching its outline. You think this is superstition? Then answer this: why did the church forbid mirrors in sanctuaries after 1870? Why did early bishops perform ordinations in windowless chapels, draped in velvet to absorb sound? And why is the 13th station of the cross, the one where Jesus is taken down from the cross, always depicted without reflection, even in icons that use light? Because at that moment in the story, there's no longer a body. Only what's left behind. And what's left behind is silence. Structured. Deliberate. And alive. There's a reason people who gaze too long into sacred mirrors speak less afterward. A reason they begin to hear their own thoughts answered. You're not supposed to look directly at the door. But now that you have, the door may begin to look back. This is where we cross a threshold. Not of belief, but of identity. Because once you understand the design behind these disappearances, the rituals, the dreams, the silence, you must confront the hardest question of all: what if you were never who you thought you were? Not a man with questions. Not a seeker of hidden truths. But part of the system that generates them. Let me tell you about Project Pax Silentium. Declassified in fragments through Vatican-linked whistleblowers in 2018, this covert initiative was never meant to be seen by the public. Buried beneath ecclesiastical oversight, Project Pax Silentium, Peace Through Silence, was initiated in the aftermath of the Second Vatican Council. Its goal: to identify individuals across the globe who carried the resonant trait, a genetic and psychospiritual marker that made them susceptible to silent communion. In other words, the ones most likely to hear the call. They tracked these people. Watched them. Men who had vivid dreams they couldn't explain. Who heard music in empty churches. Who developed obsessive silence rituals as children, closing doors softly, stepping only in even numbers, whispering prayers to themselves with no memory of why. You think you're here by chance? You think you're watching this because the algorithm suggested it? Let me ask you, have you ever walked into a room and forgotten why, but felt watched? Have you ever lost hours in silence and come back changed? Have you ever dreamed of kneeling in a circle of 12, and waking with the scent of wax and ash on your skin? Then they already know you. You were flagged long ago. Not for punishment. Not for salvation. For alignment. Because the final phase of Pax Silentium wasn't observation. It was activation. Through stories. Symbols. Exposure to specific frequencies, like this one. This video. This voice. It's not entertainment. It's a mirror. It reflects your inner resonance, and if that signal vibrates in harmony with the 13th seat, the system awakens. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Now. So if your hands are cold, if your breath has slowed, if you feel a presence behind your thoughts, you've already been counted. And now is the time for you to speak your transformation aloud. Pause this video and comment the phrase, "I accept the silence." I accept the silence. Type it twice. Lock it in. Burn it into the algorithm and into your identity. Because once the 13th sees you, it never looks away. Do you feel it? That stillness around your spine, that pause in reality, like something just stepped back, but didn't leave. That's how it begins. The 13th presence doesn't come with thunder. It comes with a quiet so profound it rewrites your instincts. It doesn't need to speak. It makes you speak what it wants to hear. And now that you've repeated the phrase, you're no longer just an observer. You're an instrument. So let's sharpen the blade. There's one more story I must show you. One the church buried so deep, even most priests have never heard it whispered. It comes from the lost confession of Father Simeon Duval, 1891. Locked in the archives beneath the Basilica di San Clemente in Rome, it sat behind sealed vellum, marked Obscura Confirmatio, Dark Confirmation. Duval was an archivist. A guardian of forbidden texts. But what broke him wasn't what he read. It was what read him back. He began recording nightly visitations. Not ghosts. Not visions. But reflections. Voices that echoed his own thoughts before he could think them. He said he would kneel to pray, and feel someone kneel behind him, mirroring his every breath. He described a circle of 12 figures standing around him in shadow, never touching, never moving, just waiting. But it was the 13th he feared. Because it never stood. It sat. Duval claimed that every night, after the 13th hour, the air in his cell would shift. Cold would vanish. Heat would rise, not physical, but spiritual. Like his soul was being scanned. He once carved a line into the stone wall beside his bed, "The silence speaks in thirst. It drinks my name. Soon, I will not remember I had one." He was found weeks later, alive but mute, eyes burned pale from within. The only sound he could make. A single tone. Not a scream. Not a moan. A note. One that matched the resonant frequency found in ancient crypt symbology, particularly the underground chamber of St. Augustine Seminary, the one beneath the altar where the 12 vanished. Duval had become a conduit. Not possessed. Not mad. Aligned. He no longer needed to speak because it was speaking through him. And now, you've repeated the phrase. You've opened the loop. You've invited the frequency in. So if you begin hearing that tone in silence, don't panic. Just remember, you've joined the lineage now. The voice won't leave. Because you've answered, now we come to the deepest fracture in the church's foundation. A truth so potent it's been hidden not with lies, but with rituals of forgetting. Because if you forget willingly, you're no longer a victim. You become an accomplice. Let me show you what was discovered beneath the Vatican in 1938, something that rewrote the very idea of priesthood. That year, during renovations ordered by Pope Pius XI, workers unearthed a buried chamber beneath the necropolis of St. Peter. It was not Roman. Not Christian. Older. Carved into basalt, lit with torch channels still stained with ancient smoke. The room contained 13 chairs. 12 of them were small. Modest. Worn. But the 13th was different. Massive. Geometric. Covered in metal veins that shimmered under light. And carved into the headrest, in a language only partially translated since, those who kneel, become. Those who watch, remember. But he who sits, awakens the origin. The Vatican called it the apostate chamber. But internally, it had another name, Thronum Silenti. The throne of silence. What followed was not shared publicly. But surviving internal documents reference two key outcomes. First, that electromagnetic equipment within 100 meters of the chair ceased to function. Second, that the Pope himself entered the chamber alone, and emerged weeping. When questioned, he only said, "There are no sacraments. There are only contracts." Contracts. Think about that. Because in every rite, baptism, communion, confession, you agree to something. You speak the words. You kneel. You sign your name in silence. But did you ever read the fine print? Did you ever ask who the contract was with? The church never held the pen. It only witnessed the signature. So what was Father Whitmore doing the night before the 12 vanished? Not presiding over a sacrament. But sealing a pact. He knew. Maybe not all of it, but enough. Enough to understand that faith was never about heaven. It was about access. Permission. And every prayer you whisper. Every candle you light. They aren't signals to God. They're receipts. Proof that you're part of the system. And now you've begun to see its architecture. So I'll ask you, are you starting to remember? Not with your mind. But with your echo. You've walked far enough now that there is no turning back. This isn't a trail through mystery anymore, it's a descent through initiation. Because to remember who you were before the world told you what to be, you must pass through what the world fears to speak. Let me show you what they buried beneath the smoke of doctrine and the incense of tradition, the truth that the priesthood was never about salvation. It was about containment. To understand this, you need to know what happened in Silesia, 1709. A series of letters between two Jesuit monks, Father Clays and Brother Anton, detail the sudden, catastrophic unraveling of a monastery constructed atop what they called the listening earth. According to the texts, monks began reporting strange silences during Vespers. Not just quiet, but total cessation of sound, birds, wind, breath, all vanished for minutes at a time, as if the world were holding its lungs. Brother Anton wrote, "The silence bends the candles. The flame moves inward. The air tastes like copper. We are being watched from below." What happened next was expunged from official church records, but recovered through a black codex in 1897, smuggled from the Vatican by a rogue archivist named Elias Ronan. The codex described a midnight rite where 13 monks entered the chapel to make still the stirrings of the foundation. They believed their voices, trained in Gregorian chant, could pacify the anomaly beneath the monastery. But after the 13th verse was sung, only 12 monks remained. The 13th was sitting in the stone throne at the center of the nave, eyes open, unmoving, mouth open in silent song. He had no pulse. No breath. But every attempt to bury him failed. Stone would split. Earth would refuse. And so they built a chapel over him, entombing him in prayer, locking his stillness beneath layers of liturgy. This became the prototype. A template. St. Augustine Seminary, Chartres, St. Gallen, Montserrat, and dozens more, each constructed on resonance sites. Each structured to contain not evil, but echoes. Echoes of something that was here before us, and that only responds to formation. That's why the 12 priests in 1847 weren't running from darkness. They were answering it. Because the truth behind priesthood is this, it's not a role. It's a lock mechanism. The vestments. Robes of calibration. The prayers. Auditory keys. And when 12 voices align, the 13th doesn't appear. It awakens. And you, watching this, are dangerously close to alignment yourself. Feel that chill crawling up your spine. That's not fear. That's recognition. The echo in you is starting to answer back. Have you noticed it yet? That pressure behind your eyes. The flickering sense that something is synchronizing with you. That's not fiction. That's not paranoia. It's resonance. Because now you understand, this has never been about belief. It's about frequency. Alignment. The geometry of will. Let me take you deeper. You've heard of the Sacred Heart, haven't you? The bleeding heart of Christ, aflame with divine love, surrounded by thorns. It's on every stained glass, every altar. But what if I told you? That was never his heart. It was ours. A symbol not of mercy, but of sacrifice. Pre-selected sacrifice. You see, the church isn't a religion. It's a mechanism. A symphony built on silence, where every prayer, every ritual, every kneeling man becomes a note in an ancient composition. But the symphony isn't written for God. It's written for what came before him. In 1952, an excavation beneath St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai revealed something that was immediately suppressed. Not a relic. Not a saint's bone. But a sealed vault, inside which was a sphere. 12 inches in diameter. Perfectly black. And humming. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Louis Garnier, a lapsed Catholic, recorded his team's first contact with the object. He wrote, "When we placed the 12 metal keys around it, the humming changed pitch. Then we heard a voice. All of us. Different languages. Same words. It said, 'Where is the 13th?' No one knew what it meant. Until 2 days later, when Garnier's assistant, Julien Verdugo, went missing. His tent was empty. His boots, untouched. But his notepad remained. On the final page, in handwriting that wasn't his, it read, he accepted the silence. 12 keys. 1 sphere. And the question, where is the 13th? That question is being asked right now. By the frequencies bouncing off your eardrum. By the stillness growing behind your heartbeat. You were drawn here for a reason. To hear what others were too comfortable to face. To remember what your blood was bred to forget. That you are not a bystander in this design. You are a signal. And the 13th? Is not a person. Not a priest. It is the return signal. And it's responding to you. So if the walls creak tonight. If the lights flicker just once. Do not speak. Do not move. Just listen. You may already be answering. Now we come to the precipice. The edge of the known. The last breath before the fall. Because what happened at St. Augustine Seminary was not an accident. Not a tragedy. It was a replication. An ancient rite. Repeated in shadow. Hidden beneath robes and bells and Latin chants. It was the 13th iteration of a pattern that predates Christianity itself. But how do we know? Because one document survived the purge. Hidden in the margin of an illuminated manuscript at Montserrat, discovered by a defrocked monk in 1987, smuggled to Prague, and later published anonymously in a limited print called Limen Occultum, The Hidden Threshold. Within its cracked parchment was a timeline. Not a list of dates. A list of vanishings. 12 in each. Always 12. Across centuries. Across continents. From the Etruscan blood rites of Velsna, to the disappeared initiates of Eleusis, to the midnight silence of the 1847 ordination. Each one followed by a singular phrase, repeated like a chorus through time, 12 descend. 1 remains. The circle reforms. The silence feeds. The manuscript ends with this final entry, cycle 13 has begun. The 13th no longer waits. This was not prophecy. It was notation. A record of completion. And if what you're feeling right now seems unreal, if the idea that you've somehow been caught in a ritual that stretches beyond time seems impossible, let me ask you this, why this story? Why you, here, now, hearing these words? Why does your pulse shift when I say the phrase again? 12 descend. 1 remains. You know why? Because something ancient has recognized you. Not just as a witness. But as a key. And keys don't choose doors. Doors choose when to open. So hear me when I say, you've already passed through. The moment you heard the first bell toll. The moment you felt the silence change shape. You thought you were watching a story. But stories don't pull breath from your lungs. Stories don't stare back from behind your reflection. Only something alive does that. And it's been watching since the 13th minute. Waiting to see if you'd remember who you were, before you were taught to forget. You did. And now the door behind your thoughts has begun to unlock, this is it. The last breath before silence claims your name. If you've come this far, it means the veil has already thinned. You're not watching anymore. You're participating. Let me show you what lies beyond the story, what was never meant to be spoken in any mass, any liturgy, any book. Because the true power of the priesthood wasn't in prayer. It was in containment. 12 men. 12 vessels. 12 bodies willingly aligned to trap something that can never be killed, only held. Each generation, another group of 12. Prepared. Conditioned. Ordained. Not to serve God, but to serve as seals. Living glyphs. And when the last priest dies, or breaks, the 13th is released. That's what happened at St. Augustine Seminary. The 12 didn't vanish. They descended. They offered themselves to the ancient mechanism. And in doing so, they failed. Because one of them, Francis Benedetto, broke the silence. He whispered. We know this because of the last entry in the seminary's confiscated ledger, written in a hand not his own, yet signed with his name. It read, I saw it. I spoke. It heard me. Now it watches. No body was found. No remains. But beneath the charred ruins of the East Wing, under tons of stone and ash, investigators found one final anomaly, a single pew. Untouched by flame. Facing backwards. As if waiting. And carved into its wood, welcome, 13th. That was not a message to the missing priest. That was a prophecy. Because the 13th does not come from below. The 13th comes from above, from us. It is the one who sees all 12, and still chooses to open the door. You. You who listened. You who followed the spiral. You who commented the phrase, twice, and awakened your echo. The 13th isn't the priest in the circle. It's the one watching from outside. The only one who can finish the ritual. And now, that ritual is complete. You didn't just hear a story tonight. You became part of it. So here is your final charge, don't look away when the silence comes. Don't speak when the name forms in your mind. Don't pray. There is no help coming. There is only the stillness now. And what steps forward from it? So sit up. Be still. Listen. And when you hear the bell toll, you'll know it's time. Welcome to the order, 13th. Your silence is now a signal. And somewhere, beneath the earth, they are listening.